In this video, we will learn about a very useful offering of Salesforce Apex for asynchronous process execution, which is Batch Apex. In Salesforce, asynchronous processing allows us to run operations in the background, improving performance and user experience. Before we proceed further, if you are not sure what asynchronous processing is and how it is different from synchronous processing, I would recommend you to watch my video by clicking on the I button link. In that video, I have explained both the concepts of synchronous and asynchronous Apex with a real-life example. That video also shows what are the other ways apart from the batch Apex using which we can implement asynchronous processes in Apex. Let's start this video with our basic question. What is batch Apex? Batch Apex is a powerful feature in Salesforce that allows us to process a large number of records asynchronously. It breaks down the complete data set into small manageable chunks, which are called batches, and process them one batch at a time. This ensures that we stay within the Salesforce's governor limits, making our data processing efficient and scalable. A batch Apex implementation contains a class that implements an interface, Database.batchable. This interface has three methods that we need to implement in our batch Apex class: start, execute, and finish. The start method prepares the batch job for processing. This is the first method that gets called whenever we call or execute a batch Apex class. This method returns either a query locator or an iterable object to specify the records to be processed in the entire batch Apex transaction. The execute method processes each batch of records. This method gets executed after the start method completes its execution. Salesforce executes this method based on the number of batches that will be needed to process the total number of records that are returned by the start method. The finish method executes the post-processing logic after all the batches are processed. This method executes after the last execution of the execute method. This method is useful for sending notifications or logging results to the user who initiated or executed this batch Apex class. Note that the start and finish method execute only once in a lifespan of a batch Apex execution, while the execute method executes n number of times. To make things clearer, let's look at a practical example. Here, we will create a batch Apex class to update the annual revenue field of all the account records in a Salesforce instance. We will go to the developer console in Salesforce and create a new class that update accounts batchable. Once the developer console creates a class with a dummy code for us, we will implement the interface, Database.batchable. Note that if we do not implement this interface, Salesforce will not recognize this class as a batch class and will not allow us to execute it. We will first define the method. Start. Start method should be an instance method. The return type of this method is database.queryLocator, as we will return an object of this class only. This method should accept a parameter of type database.batchable context. Inside this method, we will write a query inside the method database.getQueryLocator to fetch all the accounts in this instance. We will call this method after the return statement so that this method returns a QueryLocator object. Next, we will define the execute method, which is again an instance method. This method has a void return type. This accepts two parameters. First is of type database.batchable context and the second is of type list of accounts. This second parameter named scope will contain the records in a particular batch to process in the execute method. Inside this method, we will write the logic to update the annual revenue field. At the end, we will define the finish method. This method returns void and accepts only one parameter of type database.batchable context. Inside this method, we will write a code to print a message in Apex logs notifying us about the completion of this batch Apex class execution. Now, to run this batch Apex class as a batch job, we will write this code in the execute anonymous Apex window. If you notice the first statement, we are creating an object or an instance of the class update accounts batchable. Then on the second line, we are calling the method execute batch of the class database while passing two parameters to it. The first is the object of the batch class that we created on the first line, and the second is the size of the batch. This parameter of batch size determines how many records should be processed in a single batch out of the total number of records that will be passed by the start method to the execute method. Since we have limited the account records to only 15, we will use 5 as the batch size. Once we click on the execute button, we can notice that in the logs section, there are multiple Apex logs generated. One is for the Apex code that we executed in the execute anonymous Apex window. Here are 5 other Apex logs. 2 of them are created by the start and finish methods. The operation for these Apex logs is batch Apex. The rest of them where operation is serial batch Apex range. Chunk handler are created by the execute method's multiple executions. Since we had queried 15 records of accounts and specified 5 as the size of each batch, the execute method got executed 3 times. I hope that this demonstration gave you a good basic idea of how to implement a batch Apex. Now, before I wrap this video up, let me walk you through a few best practices for using the batch Apex. Batch size optimization. The batch size should be optimal considering the automations like flows, triggers, or validations that you have written on A subjects that we are processing in the execute method. If there are a lot of automations that will consume more time, you should consider specifying a smaller batch size. Efficient querying. Make sure that the SOQL query that you specify in the start method should have appropriate filters to return only the records that we want to manipulate or process in the execute method. Exception handling and logging. Use appropriate exception handling and logging mechanisms, especially in the execute method, as this method gets executed in different Apex transactions, generating different Apex logs. So, you should consider having the logs created in the database for each execute method so that after the batch completes the execution, you can refer to them and troubleshoot the failures. Transactional integrity. Since the entire operation is divided into multiple batches that execute separately, it is possible that some batches may execute successfully while some may fail. So, if you want the entire operation to either succeed or fail, then consider either increasing the batch size so that the batch will process all the records in one shot, or think of using other asynchronous Apex options such as queuable Apex or future methods. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more Salesforce related content. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover next. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.